The wealthy investors laughed at the farmer's son until his simple invention saved their companies millions. Eli Turner was 29 years old when six wealthy investors laughed at the machine he had built from irrigation pipe, bicycle gears, and parts taken from a broken grain conveyor. The meeting took place inside a private conference room on the 46th floor of the Harrington Financial Center. Through the glass wall behind him, the city stretched beneath a pale winter sky. The investors sat around a polished black table wearing tailored suits, expensive watches, and expressions that made it clear they had already decided what kind of man Eli was. He wore clean jeans, brown work boots, and the only jacket he owned that did not smell of diesel fuel. The boots were still marked with dry red soil from his family's farm. On the table beside him stood a metal box no larger than a microwave oven. Several transparent tubes ran through its frame. A small sensor panel had been fixed to the front with 4 screws that did not match. The invention looked unfinished because it was. Eli had spent nearly everything he had making it work. He had not spent anything making it beautiful. At the far end of the table sat Charles Harrington, founder of Harrington Capital and the man who had agreed to give Eli 15 minutes. Charles was 62, silver-haired, and known for investing in agricultural technology, manufacturing, and logistics companies. He had made his first fortune buying struggling factories, cutting their costs, and selling them before the remaining employees understood what had happened. Beside him sat his daughter, Vanessa Harrington, who managed the firm's industrial investments. The other investors represented food processing companies, agricultural suppliers, and private funds. Charles tapped a pen against Eli's proposal. "You call this the flow guard," he said. "Yes." "And it prevents equipment failure?" "It detects the conditions that cause failure before the machine stops." A man named Richard Sloan leaned toward the prototype. "In farm irrigation systems?" "In any system that moves liquid, grain, powder, or small materials through pumps, pipes, feeders, or conveyors." Richard looked at the exposed tubing. "With bicycle parts?" One investor laughed. Eli kept his eyes on Charles. "The prototype uses whatever I could afford." Vanessa opened the financial section. "You are asking for $800,000. "Yes." "For testing, manufacturing, certifications, and hiring?" "Yes." "What have you invested personally?" $43,000. Richard looked at Eli's clothes. "You had $43,000. "I sold equipment." "What kind?" "A tractor, 2 trailers, and part of my land." The laughter disappeared for a moment. Charles studied him. "Your family's land?" "My portion." "And your father allowed that?" "My father is dead." The room became still. Charles set down his pen. "Continue." Eli stepped toward the machine. "The systems used on farms and inside processing facilities usually fail in predictable ways. Pressure changes, heat rises, flow becomes uneven, motors begin drawing more power, vibrations change." One investor interrupted. "Modern industrial systems already have sensors." "Large systems do." "So what is new?" "They have separate sensors reporting separate measurements. Most small and medium facilities do not combine the information in a way that gives workers an early warning they can actually use." Vanessa looked at the prototype. "And your machine does?" "It attaches to existing equipment. It listens for changes in pressure, vibration, temperature, and power use. Then it compares the pattern with normal operation." Richard smiled. "It listens." "That is the simplest way to explain it." "Sounds scientific." Several men laughed again. Eli continued. "When something begins moving incorrectly, FlowGuard identifies the change before the system blocks, overheats, or breaks." Charles glanced at the photographs in the proposal. "You tested it on your farm." "For 11 months." "How many systems?" 7 irrigation lines, 3 grain augers, 1 feed mixer, and a refrigeration pump at a dairy farm nearby." "Results?" "We prevented 9 major failures." "Prevented or predicted?" "Both." "How much money did that save?" About $170,000 across 4 farms. Richard leaned back. According to farmers, you know. According to invoices for repairs they did not need and crops they did not lose. But no independent testing. Not yet. No patent? Application filed. No manufacturing partner? No. No software company? No. Richard spread his hands. So we have a farmer's son with a homemade alarm box asking for almost $1 million. Eli looked at him. Yes. Richard laughed. This time the others joined him. Vanessa did not. She was still reading the technical report. Charles allowed the laughter to continue for several seconds. Then he asked, "Why has no established company built this already?" They build systems for customers who can afford full automation. And you want to serve customers who cannot. I want to make failure detection cheap enough that ordinary farms and smaller factories can use it. That does not sound like a high-margin market. No. Charles looked toward the other investors. You hear that? At least he's honest. Richard smiled. Honesty does not create returns. Neither does equipment failure, Eli said. Richard's smile vanished. Charles raised an eyebrow. Eli continued before fear could stop him. One of your portfolio companies lost nearly $4 million last year after a production line blockage damaged 2 motors and contaminated a batch. Vanessa looked up. How do you know that? The loss was mentioned in an industry report. That plant has modern monitoring, Richard said. It had motor sensors. The blockage began in the material feed. The pressure changes appeared almost 40 minutes before the motor failed. Richard stared at him. You're making assumptions. I requested the maintenance report. From whom? A technician who worked there. Charles's voice became colder. You have confidential maintenance records? No, I have the technician's description and public insurance filings. Vanessa closed the proposal. What caused the failure? Material density changed after moisture entered storage. The feed became uneven. The motor compensated until it overheated. Charles turned toward Richard. Richard said nothing. Eli placed one hand on the prototype. Most companies do not lose money because no one installed a sensor. They lose money because every system reports to a different screen and no one sees the pattern until production stops. Charles looked at the clock. You have 3 minutes left. Eli connected the prototype to a small pump on the table. Water began moving through the transparent tubes. A screen showed 4 green lines. This represents normal flow. He partially closed one valve. Nothing dramatic happened. Water continued moving. The pump sounded the same to everyone except Eli. One line on the screen slowly shifted from green to yellow, then another. A warning appeared. Flow instability detected, check restriction or material density. Richard looked unimpressed. You closed the valve. Yes. So the machine detected what you intentionally caused. Yes. That is not a factory. No, a factory is more expensive when no one notices. Charles asked, what would 1 unit cost? About $400 at scale. And installation? Less than an hour. Subscription? Optional monitoring software. The device works without it. Vanessa looked at him. Why optional? Because farmers do not like buying equipment that stops working when they miss a software payment. One investor laughed, but not cruelly this time. Charles closed the folder. We'll review it. Eli knew what that meant. He disconnected the pump and returned the prototype to its case. Richard checked his watch. Mr. Turner, I respect persistence, but this room invests in scalable technology, not garage projects. It was built in a barn. That does not improve the description. Eli lifted the case. Thank you for your time. As he reached the door, Vanessa spoke. How much money do you have left? He turned. Personally? Yes. $812. And the farm? Behind on 2 loan payments. Charles gave his daughter a warning look. Vanessa ignored it. Then why come here instead of finding a job? Eli held the case against his side. Because a job might save the farm for a few months. This could save thousands of farms for years. Richard smiled again. There it is. What? The speech. Eli looked around the table. I didn't prepare a speech. That makes it worse. Eli left before they could laugh again. The elevator carried him down 46 floors. His reflection in the polished metal doors looked exactly the way he had feared. A tired man in work boots carrying a homemade machine through a building full of people who invested more money before lunch than he had earned in his life. Outside, the city wind cut through his jacket. He stood near the entrance and counted what he had left. $812. The train home cost $76. The farm payment due Friday was $6,400. He had expected rejection. He had not expected the laughter to hurt. Eli had grown up on Turner family farms, 300 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat outside the town of Millbrook. His grandfather bought the original 80 acres after returning from military service. His father, Joseph, expanded the farm slowly, one field at a time, one loan at a time, one good season followed by two difficult ones. Eli learned to repair equipment before he learned to drive. At 8, he held flashlights for his father. At 12, he replaced belts. At 16, he could disassemble an irrigation pump and identify worn bearings by touch. Joseph trusted machinery more than weather forecasts. Machines warn you, he often said. People just don't listen early enough. The invention began during the driest summer in 30 years. Eli was 25. A main irrigation pump failed at 2 in the morning during a week of extreme heat. The pump had not stopped suddenly. It had been struggling for days. Pressure fluctuated. The motor ran warmer. Water distribution became uneven. But none of the changes seemed serious alone. When the bearing finally seized, replacement parts took 6 days to arrive. The western field lost nearly a quarter of its crop. The financial damage exceeded $90,000. Eli found his father sitting beside the dead pump after sunrise. Joseph held the broken bearing in one hand. I should have heard it, he said. You can't hear everything. It changed. When? I don't know. That means you couldn't have known. Joseph looked toward the dry field. Something new. Eli remembered the sentence. Something new. The motor knew through heat. The pipe knew through pressure. The frame knew through vibration. The electrical line knew through changing current. The information existed. It simply existed in separate places. That winter, Eli began experimenting. He purchased cheap sensors online. He connected them to an old computer. He attached vibration monitors to pumps and motors. He recorded weeks of normal operation. Then he created controlled problems, partially blocked lines, reduced lubrication, misaligned belts, uneven grain flow. Every failure changed several measurements before it became visible. Eli did not know how to program well enough to analyze the patterns, so he taught himself. Online courses, used textbooks, videos watched after midnight. The first system filled half a workshop. The second fit inside a toolbox. The third survived rain. The fourth predicted a blocked irrigation line 9 hours before pressure dropped enough for a worker to notice. Joseph began believing in it. Then he became ill. At first, everyone thought it was exhaustion, then stomach trouble, then doctors found pancreatic cancer. Joseph died 9 months later. The farm was already carrying heavy debt. Medical bills consumed the emergency savings. Insurance covered less than Eli expected. His mother, Margaret, wanted to sell. His younger sister, Emily, wanted to keep the farmhouse but lease the fields. Eli refused both options. He believed the farm could survive. He also believed FlowGuard could become a real business. Those two beliefs consumed everything. He sold his tractor, then trailers, then 40 acres inherited in his name. He used the money for prototypes, patent applications, sensors, testing, and farm payments. By the time he entered Harrington Capital, he had nothing left to sell except the remaining farm. The train ride home took 4 hours. Margaret collected him from the station in Joseph's old pickup truck. She looked at the case beside his feet. Well? They said no. Did they explain? They laughed first. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. Then they explained. What did they say? Too early, too small, no independent proof. Are they wrong? Eli looked through the window at frozen fields. Not completely, Margaret nodded. That is not the same as being right. When they reached the farm, Emily was waiting in the kitchen. She was 26 and worked as an elementary school teacher. She had spent the past year paying for groceries whenever the farm account ran low. How bad? She asked. We have $800. She stared at him. Total? Yes. The loan payment? Friday. And after that? The bank can begin default procedures. Margaret placed her coat over a chair. We sell the northern field. No, Eli said. Emily laughed without humor. We're out of fields you're allowed to protect emotionally. If we sell more land, the farm cannot produce enough to recover. It isn't recovering now. The invention will. The invention has taken more from the farm than the drought did. Eli looked at her. That isn't fair. Neither is watching Mom choose which bills to ignore while you travel to investor meetings. I'm trying to build something. You're trying to prove Dad was right. The kitchen became silent. Eli's face hardened. Emily continued. He believed in you, I know, but he also believed in the farm. So do I. No, you believe the farm has to become the place where your invention succeeds. Margaret spoke quietly. Enough. Emily looked away. Eli carried the case into the workshop. The building smelled of metal, dust, and old oil. His father's tools remained exactly where he had left them. The prototype sat on the bench. Eli wanted to throw it against the wall. Instead, he opened his laptop. An email waited. From Vanessa Harrington. Subject: pilot question. The message was brief. One of Harrington Capital's portfolio companies, Northline Foods, operated a grain processing facility 2 hours from Millbrook. The plant had experienced repeated feeder blockages. Vanessa was willing to arrange a 30-day unpaid trial. No investment, no promises. Eli would provide the system, install it, and carry all expenses. If FlowGuard produced measurable results, she would reconsider the proposal. He read the message 3 times, then he called her. You said unpaid. Yes. I have almost no operating cash. I assumed that. So how do I fund the installation? That is your problem. You want me to prove the device can save your company money while I pay for everything? Yes. Why? Because the investors were right about one thing. Which thing? You have no independent evidence. Eli looked at the machine. What happens if the test works? I present the results to the investment committee. And if it fails, you return to farming. That isn't your decision. No, it's your remaining money. She was not insulting him. That made the offer harder to reject. How many machines? 4 feed lines. I only have 2 complete units. Build 2 more. With what? Vanessa paused. Mr. Turner, I am offering access to a facility that would never normally allow an unproven device near its production equipment. I cannot also solve your financing. Eli closed his eyes. When do they want installation? Monday. That gave him 5 days. He borrowed $3,000 from Emily. She agreed only after forcing him to sign a repayment schedule. Margaret sold a piece of jewelry Joseph had given her on their 20th anniversary. Eli objected. She placed the money on the workbench. Your father bought me something beautiful, she said. I am using it to help his son build something useful. Eli worked through the night. He ordered sensors on credit. A local electrician named Ben Carter helped him wire the new units. Ben had attended school with Eli and now maintained equipment at a dairy plant. He asked for no payment. You can owe me, Ben said. I already owe everyone. Then you're organized. The 4 FlowGuard units were completed Sunday morning. They looked worse than the prototype shown to the investors. Wires were visible. 2 cases were different colors. One panel had been cut from an old electrical cabinet, but all 4 worked. Northline Foods occupied a huge steel facility beside a rail line. The plant processed grain into flour, starches, and industrial food ingredients. Production operated 24 hours a day. The plant manager, Denise Cole, met Eli and Ben near the loading entrance. She looked at the equipment cases. This is what Harrington approved? For a pilot. They told me it was early-stage technology. That's an elegant description. Denise did not smile. Any interruption to Line 3 costs us approximately $28,000 per hour. We won't interrupt it. If your device affects our control systems, the trial ends. It does not control anything, it only monitors. If it generates false alarms, the trial ends. How many? 1 serious false alarm. That is not a trial. That is my condition. Eli looked through the window at the processing floor. Large motors drove conveyors and feed systems beneath clouds of fine dust. What happens if we detect a real problem? You report it to maintenance. And if they disagree, they decide. Even if the warning continues, this is my plant. Eli nodded. Understood. They installed the devices. For the first 8 days, nothing happened. The systems recorded vibration, motor current, temperature, and flow patterns. Eli slept in his pickup outside the plant twice because he could not afford a nearby hotel. On the 9th day, FlowGuard issued its first warning. Feed resistance. Increasing check line. 3 intake. The maintenance supervisor, Gary Mills, examined the equipment. Everything is running. The resistance pattern changed. Pressure is normal. Motor current is rising. Within range. Vibration has shifted. Also within range. Eli showed him the combined graph. Gary crossed his arms. You built an alarm that gets nervous. The line is changing. Machines change. That combination means material is accumulating. Where? I can't tell yet. Then you can't tell me there's a problem. Gary cleared the warning. Production continued. 6 hours later, FlowGuard issued a second alert. Restriction probability, 73%. Gary ignored it. Denise called Eli into her office. You said no false alarms. It is not false. The line is operating. It is operating badly. Our current system shows normal conditions. Each measurement is still inside its individual limit. Then what is your system seeing? The relationship between them. Denise leaned back. That is not an answer I can use to stop production. How much does planned inspection cost? 2 hours. How much does failure cost? Potentially much more. Then inspect during the next scheduled cleaning. That is tomorrow morning. Good. At 3:40 that night, Line 3 stopped. A grain blockage jammed the feeder. The motor overheated. A coupling fractured. Production shut down. Gary found compacted material deep inside the intake. The line remained offline for 14 hours. The total loss exceeded $400,000. Denise was furious, not at Eli, at herself. She called him into the mechanical room. How early was the first warning? 21 hours. Why couldn't you identify the location? I need more sensors. How many? 2 additional pressure points and 1 acoustic sensor. Can you install them? Yes. How quickly? Tomorrow. Do it tonight. The pilot changed after that. Maintenance stopped treating FlowGuard as a toy. Workers began comparing its alerts with physical inspections. On day 16, the system detected abnormal vibration in a conveyor bearing. The bearing looked functional. When removed, its inner race showed a crack. Replacing it during scheduled maintenance cost $3,000. A catastrophic failure could have damaged the conveyor and stopped production for 8 hours. On day 23, FlowGuard detected uneven material density entering a dryer. The cause was a moisture leak inside a storage bin. Workers corrected it before the batch was ruined. Estimated savings, $180,000. On day 28, the device warned of increasing motor current and heat in a flour transfer system. Maintenance found a filter nearly blocked with dust. Estimated avoided downtime, 6 hours. At the end of the pilot, Denise prepared a report. Total cost avoided during 30 days, approximately $670,000. The report also included the Line 3 failure FlowGuard had predicted but the plant ignored. Vanessa called Eli. "Come back to the city." "Should I bring the prototype?" "Bring the data." The second meeting took place in the same conference room. The same investors sat around the same table. Eli wore the same jacket. This time, no one laughed when he placed the metal box beside him. Charles held Denise's report. $670,000 in avoided losses. Yes. Richard Sloan looked through the graphs. At one plant. Yes. 1 month. Yes. And your system failed to identify the exact location of the first blockage. It identified the risk 21 hours before failure, but not the location. We corrected that during the trial. Richard looked toward Charles. It remains early. Vanessa answered before Eli could. Northline wants units on every major feed system. How many? Charles asked. 84. The room became quiet. At what price? Another investor asked. 400 per unit plus monitoring and installation, Eli said. Richard smiled. That is $33,000 in hardware, hardly transformative. The annual monitoring contract is $120,000. Installation and calibration add $60,000. Still small. For one facility. Vanessa opened another document. Northline operates 12 facilities. Charles studied her. Have they committed? They want a regional rollout if the next 90 days confirm results. The investors began calculating. Eli watched their expressions change. The invention had not changed since the first meeting. The evidence had. Charles folded his hands. What are you asking for now? $1,200,000. Richard laughed once, not because the invention was funny, because the price had increased. You asked for $800,000 last month. I had no independent data last month. You still need us. Yes. Then why increase the amount? Because I need to manufacture faster, hire engineers, improve the casing, complete certification, and protect the software. Charles looked amused. You learned quickly. I learned expensively. Vanessa asked, what ownership are you offering? 15%. Richard leaned back. For $1.2 million? Yes. That values your barn company at $8 million. It values the savings we can create. No, it values your company. Then do not invest. The room went silent. Eli could hear his heartbeat. 6 weeks earlier, he had entered the same room with $800 and a farm near foreclosure. He still had almost no money, but now he possessed something the investors needed. Proof. Charles smiled slowly. You're less polite this time. I'm less uncertain. Richard closed the proposal. I'm out. 2 other investors followed. They believed the product was useful but too specialized. Charles and Vanessa remained interested. Harrington Capital offered $1,200,000 for 35%. Eli refused. They negotiated for 3 weeks. The farm loan entered default review. Emily reminded him that confidence did not make payments. Margaret said nothing. She continued placing meals outside the workshop while he worked. The final agreement gave Harrington Capital 22% for $1,400,000. Vanessa received a board seat. Eli retained control. The company was named Turner Systems. The first manufacturing facility occupied an abandoned farm equipment warehouse outside Millbrook. Eli hired Ben as chief technical engineer. He hired 3 local mechanics, 2 software developers, and a production supervisor named Carla Ruiz. Carla had spent 15 years managing electronics assembly. The first day she saw FlowGuard, she turned it over in her hands. "This looks terrible." "It works. That is not a manufacturing standard. It's why you're here." She redesigned the casing, simplified the wiring, and reduced assembly time from 6 hours to 90 minutes. The first Northline order was delivered 4 weeks late. 12 units failed during installation because moisture entered an improperly sealed connector. Eli drove to 3 facilities himself and replaced them. Northline threatened to suspend expansion. Vanessa called an emergency board meeting. "You need formal quality controls," she said. "We're building them. You should have built them before shipping. We did not know the seal would fail. That is what testing is for." We tested. Not enough. Richard Sloan was not in the room, but Eli heard his voice anyway. Barn company, garage project, farmer's son. Eli forced himself not to become defensive. Vanessa was right. An invention could be clever and still become a bad product. Turner Systems replaced every affected unit at its own cost. Carla created environmental testing. Every device was exposed to heat, cold, dust, vibration, and moisture before shipment. The changes cost nearly $200,000. They also prevented the company from collapsing. Northline continued the rollout. Within 1 year, FlowGuard operated in 7 facilities. Documented avoided failures exceeded $9 million. Other companies began calling. A dairy processor wanted to monitor refrigeration pumps. A fertilizer company needed early warnings in powder conveyors. A paper mill wanted to track chemical flow systems. A chain of commercial bakeries had repeated mixer failures. Eli discovered that the invention was more useful outside agriculture than he had imagined. Every industry had machinery. Every machine changed before it failed. Turner Systems grew. So did the pressure. Customers wanted specialized versions. Investors wanted faster expansion. Vanessa pushed Eli to focus on food processing plants first. "They have similar systems and measurable losses," she said. "Farms need it too. Farms buy slowly. They were the reason I built it. A reason is not a market strategy. If we abandon small farms, we become another company selling only to people who can afford failure." Vanessa looked at him across the boardroom. "You cannot serve everyone at the same price. Then we create 2 versions. That adds cost. So does losing the purpose." They argued for weeks. The solution came from Ben. The industrial version would include advanced analytics, cloud monitoring, and integration with factory systems. The farm version would operate locally with fewer sensors and no required subscription. Industrial customers subsidized research that made the cheaper version possible. By the 3rd year, more than 6,000 farms used FlowGuard. The company created a financing program allowing farmers to pay after harvest. Several investors objected. Eli approved it anyway. Margaret installed one of the first finished units on the irrigation pump that had inspired the invention. She stood beside Eli as the green status light appeared. "Your father would have liked that," she said. "He would have asked why it took so long." "That too." Turner Systems reached $50 million in annual revenue during its 4th year. Eli paid off the family farm. Then he bought back 12 of the 40 acres he had sold. The new owner refused to sell the rest. Eli accepted it. Success could repay debt. It could not always reverse every sacrifice. The crisis that changed the company's scale began with a summer heat wave. Temperatures remained above 100 degrees for 11 days. Factories across the region struggled with cooling systems, overloaded motors, and changing material conditions. 3 major food companies operated plants using Turner Systems. 2 others had tested FlowGuard but delayed purchasing it. One of those companies was Sterling Foods, controlled by Richard Sloan's investment group. Richard had laughed at Eli during the first meeting and declined to invest during the second. Sterling operated 7 frozen food factories. Its largest plant produced nearly a quarter of the company's annual volume. The plant used an old ammonia refrigeration system. Maintenance teams monitored pressure and temperature. They did not monitor the relationships between compressor vibration, energy draw, coolant flow, and ambient heat. Turner Systems had offered a pilot. Sterling postponed it twice. On the 9th day of the heat wave, one compressor failed. The backup unit started but operated under extreme load. A second failure would shut down refrigeration across the plant. Millions of dollars in food would begin warming. Production would stop. Hundreds of workers would be sent home. Sterling's maintenance director called Turner Systems at 2:14 in the morning. Eli answered personally. "We need temporary monitoring immediately," the man said. "How many compressors?" "6 plus coolant pumps." "How long before the backup overheats?" "Possibly 12 hours." "How far is the plant?" 3 hours from Millbrook. Eli called Ben, Carla, and the field team. They loaded equipment into 2 vans. Vanessa called while Eli was driving. "Sterling is not a customer." "They are now." "Do they have a signed agreement?" "They sent emergency authorization." "What are we charging?" "I don't know yet." That is not an acceptable answer. Neither is losing a refrigeration plant while lawyers discuss pricing. She was silent. Then she said, "Send me the authorization. I'll handle the contract." Turner's team installed sensors while the plant continued operating. The system began collecting data at 7:30. Within 40 minutes, FlowGuard flagged unstable coolant flow in the backup compressor. Maintenance found a valve partially obstructed by debris. They cleaned it. The load dropped. Then the system detected abnormal vibration in a circulation pump. The pump bearing was deteriorating. A replacement was installed during a planned 30-minute slowdown. At noon, FlowGuard warned that one refrigeration zone was drawing unusual power. Workers found ice buildup restricting airflow. By evening, the plant had stabilized. No second compressor failed. No food was lost. Production continued. Sterling's internal estimate placed avoided losses between $18 and $24 million. Richard Sloan arrived the following morning. He entered the control room in a suit that looked out of place among pipes, tools, and exhausted technicians. Eli was sitting on the floor eating from a vending machine sandwich. Richard looked at the monitoring screens. "This is your system?" "Yes." "You installed all this overnight?" "The team did." Richard nodded slowly. "How much do we owe you?" "Vanessa is handling the contract." "That means too much. Emergency work usually costs more." Richard looked toward the compressor room. "We would have lost the plant." "Possibly." "Don't be modest now." Eli stood. "I'm tired, not modest." Richard smiled faintly. "I underestimated you." "You underestimated the problem." "That too." Sterling signed a 5-year agreement worth $38 million. Then it installed Turner Systems across all 7 plants. News of the heatwave rescue spread through industrial insurance companies. Insurers began offering lower premiums to facilities using approved predictive monitoring. That changed the market. FlowGuard was no longer viewed as optional maintenance technology. It became a way to reduce financial risk. Turner Systems expanded into manufacturing, mining, water treatment, shipping, energy, and large commercial buildings. The company opened offices in Europe and Asia. Its software analyzed patterns from millions of machines. Yet the original principle remained simple. A machine usually warns before it fails. The warning matters only if someone combines the signals early enough to act. By the 7th year, Turner Systems was valued at more than $3 billion. Eli's personal stake made him wealthy enough to appear on magazine lists he never read. He still lived near the family farm. He replaced his old pickup only after the floor rusted through. Emily became director of the Turner Rural Technology Foundation, which funded equipment modernization for small farms. Margaret refused to move from the farmhouse. "You can buy a better house," Eli told her. "I have one." "The roof leaks near the porch." You own a company that predicts failure, predicts someone repairing it. The roof was repaired the next day. Charles Harrington retired from daily work. Vanessa eventually became chief executive officer of Harrington Capital. She remained on Turner Systems' board and continued arguing with Eli about nearly everything. Their arguments improved the company. He protected purpose, she protected discipline. Neither fully trusted the other's instincts. That became useful. Richard Sloan became one of Turner Systems' largest customers. At an industry conference, a reporter asked whether he regretted refusing to invest. Richard answered honestly, "Yes." The clip spread online. Eli's employees framed a screenshot and hung it in the factory cafeteria. Eli took it down. "Why?" Ben asked. "Because we did not build this to embarrass him." It was still enjoyable. Keep it on your phone. 10 years after the first investor meeting, Turner Systems announced a new device. It was smaller than Eli's original prototype. It cost less than $100. It used low-power sensors and could operate for years on a small battery. The company planned to distribute it to farmers in developing regions, where pump failures and irrigation problems could destroy an entire season. Several board members questioned the low price. Eli displayed a photograph of the original red soil field his family had lost during the drought. "This was the first market," he said. Vanessa looked at the image. "Can the program sustain itself?" "Yes. Industrial contracts fund research. Local partners handle installation. Regional data improves the system." "Profit?" "Modest." One director asked, "Then why prioritize it?" Eli looked around the boardroom. "Because the largest loss is not always measured in dollars." No one laughed. The program launched in 12 countries. Within 2 years, FlowGuard devices monitored irrigation pumps, grain systems, refrigeration equipment, water networks, and small processing machines across thousands of rural communities. Failure warnings arrived through simple lights, text messages, or local radio networks. The technology was advanced. The instruction remained basic. Check the pump, clear the line, replace the bearing, reduce the load, act before the system stops. On the company's 10th anniversary, Turner Systems held an event inside the original farm equipment warehouse. The building had been expanded, but the first workshop remained intact. Employees, farmers, engineers, customers, and investors filled the production floor. The original FlowGuard prototype stood beneath glass. The mismatched screws remained. The bicycle gear remained. The old irrigation tube had yellowed. A young engineer stood beside it. "You really showed this to investors?" "Yes." "They laughed?" "Yes." "It does look terrible." Eli smiled. "It looked worse then." During the ceremony, Vanessa walked onto the stage carrying a folder. "This contains the documented customer savings created by Turner Systems during the past decade," she said. A number appeared on the screen, $14.7 billion. The room applauded. Eli looked at the figure. It was impossible to connect it emotionally to the machine he had built alone in a barn. $14 billion in avoided downtime, damaged equipment, wasted crops, lost products, emergency repairs, and interrupted production. The investors had once laughed because the invention appeared too simple. That simplicity had become its strength. A sensor system did not need to replace every machine. It only needed to notice the moment normal operation began changing. After Vanessa's speech, Eli stepped forward. He did not discuss valuation. He did not discuss global expansion. He told the audience about the irrigation pump, the heat, the failed bearing in his father's hand. "I thought the invention began when I connected the first sensor," he said. "It didn't." He looked toward Margaret and Emily in the front row. "It began when my father said something knew the machine was failing." The room became quiet. He was right. The information was there. Pressure changed, heat changed, vibration changed, power changed. The problem was not silence. The problem was that no one had learned to listen to everything together. He looked at the engineers. "That principle applies beyond machines." Several people smiled. "Workers often see changes before management does. Farmers notice patterns before reports do. Maintenance teams understand problems before executives receive the cost. The person closest to failure may not have the title that makes others listen. Eli glanced toward the original prototype. I entered an investor meeting carrying that box. They saw cheap parts and an inexperienced founder. They were not wrong about what was missing. We had no independent testing, no manufacturing, and no proof at scale. He paused. But they confused an unfinished product with a worthless idea. Charles Harrington sat near the front. Richard Sloane sat 2 rows behind him. Neither looked uncomfortable. The story no longer belonged to the humiliation. It belonged to what came after. Eli continued. The goal was never to prove wealthy investors foolish. The goal was to prevent ordinary people from losing everything because a machine failed one day before anyone noticed. After the event, Eli drove home with Margaret. They passed the northern field he had sold years earlier. A housing development now stood on part of it. Streetlights glowed where wheat once grew. Margaret noticed him looking. You still think about buying it back. It isn't for sale. It also isn't the same land anymore. I know. You saved the rest. Eli looked toward the dark fields surrounding the farmhouse. No, a lot of people saved it. You started. That isn't the same. They reached the farm. The irrigation system continued running beneath the moonlight. A small green light blinked on the flow guard unit beside the pump. Normal pressure, normal vibration, normal temperature. Eli stepped out of the truck and listened. The pump sounded steady. Years earlier, he would have trusted the sound alone. Now, millions of machines around the world were being watched more carefully because one farmer's son had refused to believe that catastrophic failure had to arrive as a surprise. The wealthy investors had laughed at his pipes, mismatched screws, and cheap sensors. They had seen a crude machine. Eli had seen the beginning of a system that could protect farms, factories, workers, and entire companies from preventable loss. The invention made him a millionaire, then a billionaire. But its real value was measured elsewhere, in crops that were not destroyed, factories that did not close, workers who were not sent home, food that was not wasted, businesses that survived, and warnings that finally reached someone early enough to matter.